Hello and welcome back to the APUS History curriculum. In this set of videos, we are continuing our look at the 7th time period covered in APUSH, which covers 1890 through 1945. This classroom unit will focus on the years 1920 through the year 1945. As this classroom unit is the second part of Era 7, the key concepts continue to focus on economic instability, which led to new efforts to reform U.S. society and its economic system. Innovations in communication and technology contributed to the growth of mass culture, while significant changes occurred in both internal and international migration patterns. In addition, the U.S. continues to participate in international conflicts that help propel the U.S. into international prominence, which in turn brings up domestic debates about what America's role in the world should be. In our Unit 9, the topics we will look at are the 1920s, with a look at both innovations in communication and technology, as well as the cultural and political controversies of the decade, the Great Depression, the New Deal, interwar foreign policy, and World War II, with a look at both the U.S. mobilization for the war and the military itself, as well as post-war diplomacy, although we'll actually look more in depth at that final topic with our Unit 10. The decade of the 1920s was significant in transforming American society in many ways, both in terms of innovation and culture, which is why there are two topics in the curriculum devoted to this decade alone. In this video, we will be looking at topic 7.7, Innovations in Communication and Technology in the 1920s. So let's get to it. In this video, our focus is on explaining the causes and effects of innovations in communication and technology in the U.S. over time. We'll begin with Henry Ford, who revolutionized manufacturing with the introduction of the assembly line in 1913, which sped up the production of his Model T, helping to significantly reduce the cost of production, which in turn reduced the cost of the product, allowing more people the chance to purchase one. In addition, Ford raised his workers' salaries to an unprecedented $5 a day, which allowed them to afford the cars they were making. This was essentially a form of welfare capitalism, which expanded throughout the 1920s and not only allowed for more consumption, but less agitation amongst workers, since Ford did not want unions in his plants, and skilled workers were being replaced with semi-skilled or unskilled workers on the assembly line. The assembly line's influence reached far beyond the automotive sector, triggering a shift in manufacturing across various industries, which we'll look at more in a moment. With so many more cars available to the masses needed places to go and things to do, creating a demand for tourist destinations, diners, and service stations. In addition, as people's mobility increased, they could increasingly settle outside of urban centers into suburbs, a phenomenon that becomes an even bigger deal in the next time period. Even cities themselves begin to make changes to their infrastructure because of the automobile. Cities like Los Angeles took advantage of the ease of transportation the car represented and spread out, from the Westchester area to San Pedro and even into the San Fernando Valley. This population boom buoyed by the booming film and oil industries in the region. Continuing to use Los Angeles as an example, its population would grow from about 570,000 in 1920 to a population of over 1.2 million by 1930. The city built broad boulevards and developed shopping districts that centered around the automobile. Real estate developers also focused on building single-family homes as opposed to multifamily dwellings like apartments, further encouraging this urban sprawl. And many large cities followed a similar model, like St. Louis, Houston, and many others. A key influence to this manufacturing transformation was the integration of principles from scientific management, a concept pioneered by Frederick Taylor. Taylor's approach, involving a careful observation and timing of workers' tasks, laid the groundwork for the efficiency achieved on assembly lines. In this new industrial landscape, skilled workers were gradually replaced by unskilled workers. This shift not only altered the nature of work, but also sparked broader societal changes. And it isn't just automobiles that are being manufactured in this assembly line fashion. So were various consumer appliances, radios, and even various health and beauty products. By 1930, about 2/3 of American homes had electricity and half had phones. As more homes got electricity, new gadgets like refrigerators and washing machines, vacuums, and toasters became popular. Many of the products being manufactured were targeted as labor-saving devices for women, making their jobs easier since women still usually had the traditional role of homemaker. Realistically, women didn't actually reduce the time that they spent tending to their homes, but instead faced an increased pressure to maintain a higher standard of cleanliness and order within their household. An overall higher standard of living, spurred by increased earnings during the war years, meant that Americans had extra income to spend on commodities like these. Plus, with American farms producing so much, food was cheap and plentiful, although this doesn't actually help farmers with their incomes very much. The expansion of credit in the 1920s also allowed for the sale of more consumer goods and put automobiles within the reach of average Americans. Now individuals who could not afford to purchase a car or many other consumer goods at full price could pay for it over time, with interest, of course. With so many new products and so many Americans eager to purchase them, advertising became a central institution in this new consumer economy. And both print and radio advertisements reached millions of potential consumers and made all of these consumer goods even more attractive. Radio itself became a craze in the 1920s, as it brought the entire country into the average American home for the first time, offering a relatively cheap form of entertainment and information. The first commercial radio broadcast went out on November 2, 1920, transmitting the results of the presidential race between Warren Harding and James Cox. Advancements in technology led to the development of radios with built-in speakers, as opposed to separate earphones, and the American public raced to stores to buy a radio of their own. Stores, of course, made it easier by letting people pay in installments, which meant that more households could purchase them. Families gathered around the radio in their living rooms, listening to popular shows, which came on at specific times and days so that people could plan their daily activities around their favorite shows. And there was something for everyone. There were soap operas, detective stories, comedies, vaudeville, westerns, and many others. Classical music and opera were heard by large numbers of Americans for the first time, as was jazz and country music. The Grand Ole Opry premiered in 1925 as an hour-long barn dance. Amos and Andy was a comedy that debuted in 1928 and was on for decades, centering around a group of African-American friends in the city. Although the actual actors and writers were white and perpetuated many of the racist stereotypes of the day, much like the minstrel shows had done in the previous century. Radio also helped to popularize sports figures and their accomplishments. Jim Thorpe, who grew up in the Sac and Fox Nation in Oklahoma, was known as one of the best athletes in the world. He medaled in the 1912 Olympic Games, played Major League Baseball from 1913 to 1919, and was one of the founding members of the National Football League, where he both played and coached through the late 1920s. He even had a brief career in professional basketball in the late 20s. Other sports superstars were soon household names as well. In 1926, Gertrude Ederle became the first woman to swim the English Channel. And not only was she the first woman to do it, her time was also 2 hours faster than any man had ever accomplished the feat previously. Helen Wills dominated women's tennis, winning Wimbledon 8 times in the late 1920s. Bill Tilden won the men's national singles title every year from 1920 to 1925. Boxer Jack Dempsey headlined the first $1 million sporting event when he defended his world title. In football, the focus was more on college ball as the NFL was still in its infancy. Red Grange played for the University of Illinois and was known as the Galloping Ghost because of his ability to not be tackled. He, along with Notre Dame coach Knute Rockne, led college sports into this new mass consumption era. Perhaps the biggest star of all time was the Sultan of SWAT, Babe Ruth, who along with teammate Lou Gehrig became America's first baseball heroes. The National Hockey League expanded in the 1920s, adding American teams from Boston and New York, which actually added 2 teams, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Detroit. And the athletes didn't even have to be human to have a strong radio following. In horse racing, the unquestioned king of the track was Man o' War, who won races by as much as 100 lengths, which translates to roughly 800 to 900 feet, winning 20 out of his 21 races, ironically losing only to a horse named Upset. And the horse himself, he's widely regarded as the greatest racehorse in history. Movies were also in development as a form of mass entertainment. As the popularity of moving pictures grew in the early part of the decade, movie palaces capable of seating thousands sprang up in major cities. For just a quarter, sometimes less, Americans could escape from their problems and lose themselves in another era or world. People of all ages attended the movie with far more regularity than today, often going more than once per week. By the end of the decade, weekly movie attendance was up to 90 million people, and the total U.S. population was only about 123 million. Movies set a standard of behavior for people to imitate. It also helped the celebrity culture to emerge as people followed the antics of actors such as Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, or the romantic lives of Rudolph Valentino, Mary Pickford, or Clara Bow. The genre of movies varied, with the dominant types ranging from musicals in the late 20s to horror and gangster films in the 30s. Southern racism also spread into the mainstream with films like Birth of a Nation from 1915, all the way through to Gone with the Wind, released in 1939. Some of the stars of the day made as many as 15 films a year, and some, like Mary Pickford, nicknamed America's Sweetheart, were earning $1 million a year by 1920 through a combination of film, earnings, and endorsement contracts. Remember, though, that through 1927, these were silent films, and there were many film companies producing them in the early part of the decade, releasing as many as 800 feature films a year. In 1927, though, the world of the silent movie came to a rapid end with the release of the first talkie, The Jazz Singer. The plot of this film, which starred Al Jolson, followed the life of a Jewish man from his boyhood days of preparing to be the cantor at a local synagogue to his life as a famous and Americanized jazz singer. Both the story and the new sound technology used to present it were popular with audiences around the country. It quickly became a huge hit, and this began what is known as the golden age of Hollywood. But it made making movies more costly, leading to just a handful of studios emerging to dominate the industry. Well, that covers what you need to know about Topic 7.7, Innovations in Communication and Technology in the 1920s. Be sure to keep up with your reading, and I'll catch you in the next video.